Hey everybody, I'm Tiffany. I'm a PA and I've spent about the last 17 years hanging out in internal medicine. And today we are going to talk a little bit about colorectal cancer and screenings. So did you all know that they actually moved down the screening age for colorectal cancer? So for a while, or really a long time, it used to be you had to start screening at age 50. But not too long ago, they actually moved the screening age down to 45. So let's talk about why. So some statistics from the year 2023, there was 150,000 new cases of colorectal cancer and 50,000 deaths that year. Now, 13% of those cancers were actually in people that were under the age of 50. So that's kind of an alarming statistic considering that we weren't even recommending that people screen for colorectal cancer until 50. So basically the United States Task Force looked at these numbers and says, hey, we've got to start screening for colorectal cancer earlier. So now across the board, we've officially moved the screening age down to 45. So in the office, when I talk to people about this, usually I get a big giant groan from people. They're like, oh, 45, I don't want to have to do a colonoscopy. I don't want to have to do a screening. So let's talk about a few things. So colorectal cancer is the third most common cancer in the United States. You could look at this chart here. So that is the prevalence in the United States of colorectal cancer, but it's actually one of the most preventable because it has the most modifiable risk factors. So some of the risk factors for colorectal cancer are smoking and alcohol consumption, a diet full of high processed foods or high in processed meat. Obesity is a huge factor, and being sedentary. And if you look at this map here, it may explain kind of why there is an area really kind of in this area right here, because people in this area tend to be more obese and more sedentary, unfortunately. So that's probably what that's about. So in order to detect colorectal cancer, we have to screen for it. So we know that now at 45, you have to start screening. So what are your options? So colonoscopy is the main option that most people know about, and that's still considered your gold standard. The downside of colonoscopy is obviously you got to do the prep. I always tell people in the office, it's not the procedure that sucks. The procedure is like a good nap, but it's the prep and the fact that you have to have a driver that day and you have to take off work and you have to prep the day before. I think everybody knows all these things about the colonoscopy, but if you do a colonoscopy and your colonoscopy is good and they have no polyps, they'll usually give you a good 10 years before you have to do another colonoscopy. Now, the other benefit is that if they see a polyp while they're in there, they can usually go ahead and cut it out, send it for pathology, and then take care of the problem while they're in there. So for me personally as a clinician, I usually always try to get people to go for a colonoscopy, even though I do get a lot of groans. Option number 2, which has been on the market several years now, is called a Cologuard test, or the other name for it is a FIT DNA test. So this is becoming increasingly more popular because there's been a lot of marketing, a lot of commercials. So that test is actually where they send you the box at home, you get the box, you poop in the box, and then you send the box off, and it comes back as a result to your provider. So even though this kind of wakes people out a little bit, it is a nice option for people that either I can't get them to kind of talk them into a colonoscopy, or they just don't really feel like they're high risk enough. They don't want to go through. Maybe they can't get off work. They don't have somebody to drive them. So I do offer it as an option, but I just like to make sure that people realize it's just not as good as the colonoscopy. So when you look at the numbers on a Cologuard test, it actually does detect about 92% of stage 1 and stage 2 cancers, which is pretty good, but it only detects about 40% of all polyps. So the detection of polyps is not amazing on Cologuard. Theoretically, polyps can grow into cancer if they grow big enough or if they stay there long enough. So it's really just not going to detect polyps. Colonoscopies, however, you're basically doing a direct visualization of the colon, so you're going to see about 90 to 95% of all polyps when you do a colonoscopy. There's also about a 13% false positive rate with a Cologuard test, meaning that you will get a Cologuard test back and it's positive. Of course, this always freaks people out. They get the test and they're like, oh my gosh, I have cancer. I always try to tell people, this doesn't mean you have cancer, it just means there might be something else we need to check out. Of course, then we've got to refer you to GI, then you have to get in for a colonoscopy. So it's usually a couple weeks of kind of waiting and anxiety for the patient. And then, usually it just means that, there might be a polyp or something going on there. So it doesn't always mean that there's cancer, but there is a high rate of false positive, or at least about 13%. And then a third option that has come up within about the last year is something called a Shield DNA test. Now, this test is actually a blood test. I don't have a lot of clinical experience with this test, but I just wanted to add it as an option because it's probably up and coming. So this seems like an attractive option for a lot of people because usually you're going to your provider, you're getting blood work done anyway, so it just seems like, hey, let's throw this test in, right? When you actually look at the statistics on the Shield test, it will detect about 100% of late-stage cancers, but unfortunately, as far as stage 1 cancers, the detection rate is not so amazing. It's only going to detect about 65% of stage 1 cancers, and it really doesn't detect polyps very well at all. So the key to being able to treat colon cancer well is to get it in the very early stages. So I'm a little bit afraid that when this option becomes more popular and more well covered by insurance, that when people want to try to lean towards this option, they're going to get a little bit more false confidence about this blood test. It definitely does not detect the colorectal cancers until it gets to the much later stages. So I'm definitely, as a clinician, really going to not lean towards this in clinical practice yet. I do think that probably will get better with time, but I don't think the technology is quite there yet. So when you go to your yearly wellness appointment when you're 45, do not be surprised if your provider brings it up. If your provider doesn't bring it up, then you bring it up, please, because because early screening and detection is the key to making sure that we are getting adequate care. So this is just one of these things that we got to do. So we do have several screening options. My personal opinion is that a colonoscopy is still the gold standard of screening. So, but for my people who just absolutely cannot do a colonoscopy or they have reservations about the colonoscopy, I do usually offer the other options as an alternative. The last alternative is always, just not doing anything. Ignorance is not always bliss in this case. So, all right, guys, if y'all have questions, just drop them in the comments. Y'all have a good night.